Today we're going to be looking at this interesting little character here. It's a bomblet from a cluster bomb. This is a BLU-26 to be specific. These were used during the Vietnam War. Can't say for sure how many are in use now, but it was upgraded and is still in use today. This is produced by the US and distributed amongst its allies, including the Ukraine. Again, maybe not specifically the 26, but variants of this bomb are still being used today. We'll start with the definition. The definition of cluster ammunition defines cluster ammunition as a conventional munition that is designed to dispense or release explosive submunitions, each weighing less than 20 kilograms. Thus, cluster ammunition consists of a dispenser and submunitions loaded into it. This is the submunitions. They come in different types. The first one to really be used in any large amounts was the Russian butterfly bomb. Cluster bomb to really be used in any amount would be the SD-2 butterfly bomb in 1940, developed by the Germans. It was used against airfields, but also they developed an anti-personnel version of it, or perhaps they just dropped the standard bomb onto the civilian targets as well. It weighed about 2 kilograms, and I don't know how many they would drop at a time, but this guy here, they would drop about 650 per bomb. It could also be delivered by artillery shells, which is the predominant way it's being used in the Ukraine right now. So, what is inside this little guy here? Inside him, you'll see in the diagram provided by MIT, who is doing a project to visually identify the unexploded ordnance in the field before anyone gets close to them. Interesting project to look up. I'll see if I can include a link at the bottom. I have to do some back research. But what you have is you have a thin aluminum shell, and as you can see, BBs. These are retaining clips made out of stamped metal, and the design of these fins would catch the air and spin it in this direction. Let's see if I can spin it without exploding. There you go. Spin that again. That would arm the fuse. I don't know specifically how long it had to spin for or what RPM, and once it's armed, it can either detonate on impact, which is the more reliable fuse, or it can have a timed fuse. And the timed fuse are particularly the dangerous ones because they can go off to an hour later, and of course if there's a problem with the fuse, it becomes more dangerous. They have upgraded the fuses on a lot of these to be self-destructive fuses. Once the fuse has been armed, and it will destroy itself if not completely detonate the device, so it hopefully will not go off afterwards. But there's never 100%, and that's kind of been the big issue about these guys here. Looking into a 1972 study on these done by the US military, they noted that these guys here are not particularly well, actually the BLU-26s are very good bombs and reliable bombs. Of course, everything's got to be cheaper. I'll bring up a photo here showing you the costs. In 1972, the lowest bidder was manufacturing these for 28 cents, the equivalent of $2.47 in 2023. So they're not expensive. They're more expensive than a bullet, but they're not expensive. The development of the later ones was actually to reduce manufacturing costs of these, non-actual improvement in the mechanisms or reliability. In fact, the reliability of the newer ones is considerably lower than these older guys here. In a worst case scenario deployment of under 1,000 feet, these guys had 100% either explosion or retrieval rate without being dangerous. The later ones, the BLU-63s, had a 41% failure rate at low altitude. That's worst case scenario. That's 1972. There's been improvements. The target was 5% on these guys. So you do the math on that. 605 of these dropped by one bomb you're going to have at 5%, 30 of them not going off and being potential landmines for people to come across. Now, even if you do the ideal 2%, which is what the current standards are, you're still talking about 12 unexploded bomblets per drop, and that's of varying types. So to say that these guys are safe, I'm not going to say one way or the other. I'll let you guys make that conclusion. You can. There's several diagrams I'll be putting up here. One will show the canister, and you'll see that there are several opened versions of these, and you can see the high explosives, and also you'll see the inner shell, which is a crisscrossed piece of sheet steel that's been stamped at 300 tons of pressure to turn it into that half round shape that you're seeing in front of you right here. So you have aluminum, steel, explosives, and then in the middle of all that you have your fuse. They can be loaded into the warheads for delivery by artillery or aircraft. Most common is airdropping. There's a photo here that is excellent. I believe it's out of Yemen, fairly recently, I think 2012 around there, 2014, showing a entire bomb that has been dropped but didn't open, and now you have 605 of these guys, all potentially armed and waiting to go off. Not a pretty sight. You could see the blanket coverage area. This from a photo from Wikipedia showing an F-105 Thud, which is basically an interceptor bomber used by the U.S. during the 60s and 70s. The blanket area is massive, absolutely massive. And that's kind of what they're talking about in the Ukraine right now, which is dropping these guys into what will be farm area or populated areas and having them not go off. How do you clear it? The reasoning used is you don't really worry that much because the Russians have already cluster bombed and or mined these areas, so they have to be disposed of properly anyways. I'm not going to make a comment on that one or the other. I would say in an ideal world, in an ideal war, which is a contradiction in term, ideal war, but if these things worked as advertised, they're not a bad option. But the problem is reality and paperwork are two different things. So one more thing is there has been a ban by multiple countries on the use of these bombs, which is quite interesting. I'll draw you up a map here. Most of these places, if you look, will be former British colonies or current British colonies in Africa and places like that, where they don't have the resources to do explosive ordnance disposal, unexploded UEDs, UXO, I can't think what it's called now. And the one interesting too about these guys here is there's a organization, a nonprofit organization that called BankTrack. BankTrack looks at the way money is being loaned and spent by larger countries, and these guys in particular have been financed to manufacture them, not surprisingly, by U.S. companies, China, Russia, the countries that have not signed against the treaty. But what surprised some people would be that Royal Bank of Canada, Royal Bank of Scotland, which is the UK, who have all signed on to these treaties, have been loaning money to weapons manufacturers. If you're a person who believes in not funding war or the war machine, it shows the complexities and difficulties of where do you put your money. You need a bank loan? Well, you're going to go to the Royal Bank of Canada. You need it's just, where are your RSPs? Royal Bank of Canada. I'm speaking from a Canadian point of view. In America, things get far more complicated. Politics are quite different compared to Canada and the UK, and to be fair, most of the world. It's just something to keep in mind. I thought you'd find interesting. I'm not making a social commentary one way or the other. Well, I'm not trying to. It's very hard to be neutral when you're talking about something as complicated as warfare and munitions. But I always kind of look at this. If the Germans did it first, you might not want to follow suit. That's the kind of way I live life. I mean, they started with poison gas in World War One. They flamethrowers in World War One, concentration camps in World War Two, smart bombs in World War Two, cluster bombs in World War Two. I don't know how many more things they've created, but needless to say, their history is not one I would want to emulate. And I hopefully there's not too many people out there that disagree with that. But if you do, whatever, it's your opinion.